Okay, so it's already time. So I welcome all my dear academic learners for the academic counseling for the subject business law. We are already acquainted with each other. I hope you remember me. We have already met in your first semester, and I've taken few of your academic counselings for human resource management.
Yes, we do remember you, yes.
Yes, I have started the recording, and now you can write your names in the chat box so that your attendance gets recorded. What is the attendance usually for the academic counseling? Because I can see it is already time, and I have very few of you, those who have joined for the academic counseling. Is it the same, or do we have more learners?
I think it's usually between 12 to 16 people.
It is usually between how much?
12, 1, 2 to
Okay,
16.
12 to 16. Okay, okay. So, what we'll do is I'll just start giving you the overview about the entire subject. What is it? How many blocks are there? And then I'll be moving forward with, you know, that who all are going, what are the topics, what we are going to cover for this subject that is business law. Okay, Farida, you can put yourself please on mute. Welcome to the academic counseling for business law. Farida, I hope I am audible to you.
Yes, you are. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I was just telling others that I hope you all remember me. We have already met for the academic counseling in your first semester for human resource management.
Yes, I do remember. Thank you.
Okay, I hope all of you are doing good. And I think it is afternoon, if I'm not wrong, at your place.
Yes, it is. It's in the afternoon.
Yeah. So let us just quickly start with the introduction to the entire, different modules what we are going to cover. Farida, I request you that if I am going to share the slide and I'll share my entire screen, I'm making you the co-host. So you can just help me. If there is anyone who wants to enter, you can just add them, because I can see a few of them, they are entering without my permission, but then there are few those who require my permission. Farida, will you do that for me?
Yes, I will do that.
Okay, thank you so much. So let us just begin with an overview about the entire subject. How many blocks do we have and what are we going to cover today? So I'll just share my screen with you.
Hello, Rasmeet. Sorry, there was some internet issue.
Hello, ma'am. Good evening.
Good evening. I hope you are enjoying your second inning in
Academy.
this
Yes, ma'am.
inning in this.
Yes, ma'am. It is
Class.
always so good to connect with them because they are very active throughout the
Yes, yes,
academic counseling.
yes. Still, they are in active in group. So
Yes,
I just request them to write their name as attendance in the message box, and you
ma'am, I have already informed.
rest of the things you know very well.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
you can make one or two person as your co-host to help you.
I've done, ma'am. I've made Farida. She's going to help me.
And Asad also I'm making in case
Okay.
she is not there.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
So let us just start with the entire academic counseling. I'm just sharing my screen. I hope the screen is visible to everyone.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So the subject which is given to me for your second academic counseling is MMPC 013, that is business law. And as you can see, I'm just using the entire content which is already prepared by IGNOU's central, the entire, I would say, committee, which is on e-Gyan Kosh. And in this entire subject, what are we going to do is it is divided in 6 blocks. So we are going to meet for this subject 6 times. It is going to be, I'll be taking each block every time, and that is how we are going to cover this subject. As you can see, block 1, it is all about overview of business law. Block 2 is business forms and legislation, business contracts. Then it is BRF, which is also called as legal and regulatory framework, business legal and regulatory framework for financing and investments of business. Then it is intellectual property and data management. And last block is about business and sustainability. Same as your previous academic counselings, what you have attended. Here also, every block, it is divided into few chapters. The first block, that is overview of business law, that is divided into 2 units. Unit 1 is introduction to business law, and second is about certain concepts and principles. So what we'll do today is we'll start with your block 1, where I will be covering about introduction to business law, and there are certain terminologies what we use when we study business law. So I will be orienting you about that. Now, what is this entire subject all about? Why is it important? What is the relevance of studying business law? Let me first orient you about that, and then we can, just go ahead with the syllabus. When I say the entire concept of business law, it is very important while we do business. Every business has certain objective, scope, its significance. So when any businessman is into any kind of business, there is an environment in which they have to do business, and which we call that as a business environment. Certain factors are there which are really very very, we tell them that they are within the control of the business. We call them as internal factors. But then there are few factors which are beyond the control of business, and to all those factors we call them as external factors. Now, when we talk about these external factors, they are also called as political, economic, social, technological, and legal factors. I'm stressing upon the last one, that is legal factors, because when we are going to talk about in this entire subject, it is all about those legal frameworks, which is basically a mandate for all the business activities which are performed, and the entrepreneurs or the investors or the businessmen, any kind of economic transaction, if they are involved into, they have to follow these legal compliances. So as I just said, that business has different objectives, and for those objectives, it is very important that the businessman has to understand the concept of law, what is the rule of law, what are the different kinds of guidelines which the government has framed and they have given, because that is in which all the business houses are going to perform their business activities. So let me just start. I hope the first basic introduction about it is somewhat clear to you. All those who have entered
Yes,
now,
ma'am.
it's my okay. All those who have entered now, it's my request. You can please write your names in the chat box after the recording is started, because that goes as your attendance. That is marked as your attendance. So let me share that content with you. See, there might be certain differences, certain kind of challenges, I would say, which you will find while you are going to study this subject, because Indian law, when we study, and when you study the law of your own country, there is going to be some differences. In India, the law which we actually follow is most of the law which is adopted or which is taken by law of England. So from there, we have framed many of our business laws, which helps many of the economic activities which are performed in India to be done in a very successful manner. If you can see, the first module what I have just started, or the first unit what I have just started, that is introduction to business law. So after studying this entire syllabus, you will be very clear with what is the concept of business, what do you understand by the objective, scope, and significance of business law in today's current business environment? That is what I was talking about. And does the various sources through which business law has, evolved? So what, from where have we come up with these kind of sources, from where we have made so many laws in which we need to perform various business activities? So if you see, the structure of this entire unit starts from introduction. You have certain meaning of what is business, what is business environment, what is the importance of business law, its objectives, scope, basically a corporate restructuring under business law, how it is done, different sources, as I was just talking about, one of the source being the source of England, from where most of the business laws are being adopted in India, and then to compile with certain, I would say, a summary about all of this, and then few certain questions for you, which is given as your self assessment questions. The term business law, or if I say that as business laws, are used interchangeably because business law is said to be as a very generic or a kind of an umbrella term which gives you a legal framework or a regulatory framework for doing business. Now, as I was just talking about few minutes back, that every business is governed by certain external factors, and there are all those external factors which are there in our business environment, internal and external factors. And as those factors are not controlled by the businesses, or the, I would say, the entrepreneurs or the businessmen, we have to adopt to those changes, we have to follow to those changes which are governed in our country. So it is important that if you are doing or performing any kind of an activity, you need to know what is the law of your nation, what is the law in which you can perform certain tasks, and what are the certain restrictions which are given to you while you are involved in any kind of the activities which is helping you to earn profit. When we say that these business laws, let us just break those words and understand what law means and what is basically the rule of law. As I said, law means that it is a kind of an implication which defines that what is the certain guidelines in which you need to work. Or it is basically, if I say, it is a formal social force which is coming from the external environment, which is made up of certain rules, which is laid down by that state. So when we follow or when we do any business activity, it is important that in your state, in your country, what is the law which the government has made prevalent, or what is something which exists. So that is a law which is a formal social force coming from an external environment, and every businessman has to follow those different types of rules and regulations. Rule of law, when we say, it is usually and generally, where we say that under the rule of law, that means it is general, it is equally applicable to all. It is not that it has certain kind of people or a group or a community on which that particular law applies. So in the words of, if I say, Secretary General of UN, they mention that without confidence based on rule of law, without trust and transparency, there could be no well functioning of markets. Because I think you understand that law gives you the discipline, law gives you a framework, law gives you guidelines which needs to be followed so that fair business practices are done, and you can be very, very transparent regarding all your economic activities. Now there is a term which is also called as property. When I say property, it has usually two meanings. One is called as property which is owned, and ownership, if I talk about. So, law of property means, like, if you're talking about certain individuals and business which can possess or which can use and transfer their private resources, we call that as a property for them. So, it's a kind of a legal fence that keeps others out without your permission. If I say something belongs to me and it is my property, that means legally I have given a framework to that particular thing. Maybe it can be a land, it can be any kind of the business what I am doing, any kind of thing where I get a legal fence which is given to me by the law. And when then I owe that particular thing, and it is my right, that whether in which manner I need to use that or utilize that for my own business. But then I need to understand that it should not bring any harm to any other. If it does, then it is something which is punishable. So it's a criminal, I would say, an act also which I comes along with that. That if you fall do any kind of I would say certain things which are beyond your the law of property, so even you are punished for that. While I would say not actually violence, but kind of what sense should I say, that if you're not following a particular law, or you're not following that particular abide, I was actually looking for this word, that if you do not abide to certain rule and regulations of certain business activities. So now look here at this wheel of property. This wheel of property is that you have few things, few terminologies which are mentioned there. I will be talking about them in coming few minutes. Criminal law, then you have certain kind of protection which says which provides public protection for private resources and punishes those who harm them. So you have a criminal law for that. Then you have an administrative and regulatory law which says a kind of a concept where the public knows that what in which manner they can or they have to follow certain tax regulations that is mandatory on all of them. Then it is certain constitutional laws. I think you also understand this concept. You are living in a country where you have your own constitution, a framework which actually gives you a right for protection against your property. Nobody can bring any harm to the property which you hold. Again, we have a contract law which determines that how resources including labor are exchanged, so that between two owners, so that you can get the best out of it. So same manner, if I say that this is a wheel of property, that means there are so many laws which are part of it, which helps us to do our business in an effective manner. Now, when I say what is business, so I think all of you might be knowing this thing. You are in second semester of MBA. This is not a new word to you. So, business entity may be, brought forth for a very profit purpose, or it can be said as for your, the economic activities which are performed. Also, it can serve non-profit purposes, which can be supporting a charitable or a social cause. So it is basically an enterprise or an organization which is involved either in industrial, mercantile, or any kind of a commercial activity. The term business, when we say, it is where you have certain organized efforts of the enterprises which is helping the customers in receiving certain goods and services. And it is the from the businessman's side, they're supplying those goods and services with a aim to earn profit. So profit making is one of those things where we talk about economic activities in business. That is, you buy and sell, and then you earn certain amount of profit from that. Various activities are part of business, which includes maybe we'll just start with the first one, that is production. Then it is wholesaling, retailing, distribution, promotion, transportation, warehousing, that is to keep the goods in warehouse, financing, insurance, consultancies, and other such activities. They are all part of your different business, I would say, activities. So there's a very good definition which is given by Professor L.R. Dixon, and he says that business as a form of activity is something which is pursued primarily with the object of earning profit and for the benefit of those whose behalf the activity is conducted. So it can vary in size. It can be with different resources. It can be with different number of human resource. But the purpose behind starting a business majorly is to get profit. That is economic profit, economic activities, where you buy and you sell and you get ultimately in return money out of it. Now, what does business law does? Business law understands that it is very important that while you are involved into all these business activities, business law gives you a kind of a framework which is for all your commercial and mercantile activities. You have mercantile laws. So there are various branches of laws which helps you to establish certain relationship between the enterprises, the companies, and the individuals who are engaged in all such commercial matters. Business law is something which has attained a very significant position because it is a safeguard. It is giving you that protection. It is a kind of a cushion which is provided to you because that saves you against any kind of the malpractices which are done in that particular industry. So whether you are a buyer, you are a seller, or you are into any kind of the exchange of goods and services, or you are into the employment sector, whatever it is, when it is you say that a certain law applies to that particular economic activity, it gives you a cushion, it gives you that particular kind of I would say an area where you can perform your activities, but then it is not going to hinder the performance or the growth of the other. So as I just mentioned about what are those business activities, I hope you will remember that it is production, marketing, distribution, research and development, management, areas which are common areas of business, human resource management, accounts, and finance. Before we move on, let me just quickly ask you, are we clear till here?
Yes, we are.
Yes. Oh,
You
You
can
are on
just write
mute,
that.
ma'am.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. I was just saying that you can just write that in the chat box so that it becomes easy for me also to connect with you.
So far, so good, ma'am.
Okay. So you've joined.
Yes, I did. I had to go to an area where there's network, ma'am.
Okay. 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 So let us just continue. I was just giving you the brief about that what is basically business, what are the different types of business activities, and now we switch to another topic, that is what is business environment. Now, I have already briefed you in the beginning that when we talk about business environment, it is basically those factors or forces which helps us to conduct various kind of business activities. So I think you already have this as one of your subjects also in your MBA, and there are certain things which you have already studied about it. So when we talk about certain factors which have an impact on business, just give me a minute. I'll just share the screen with you. Okay. I hope the screen is visible to everyone.
Yes, it is visible.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So when we talk about certain factors or forces which help us to shape the different kinds of business activities, we can categorize them into two different factors or forces. One is internal and the other is external factors. Internal factors are basically all those factors which are within the control of any business. We also say them in the context of 5 M's, which we say money, material, machine, methods, and management. Whereas when we talk about all the external forces or factors, they are very dynamic in nature. They keep on changing. They are all those factors where we don't have any such control over those factors, and we just have to adapt to those changes which are happening in the external environment. So if I talk about certain features or characteristics of your business environment, it can be stated as it is dynamic, it is complex, it is uncertain, it is, very, very far reach. It has a very far reaching impact. And there is where you have law, regulation, policies also as one of the external factors which has a very direct effect on the conduct of business. So now, what we do is we will be moving to what is the significance of business law. Now, I have already briefed you that when we talk about the business law framework or guidelines, they are basically those which gives you a kind of a framework where you can perform various activities. So, for safeguarding the rights of the employees, I would put it in that way: safeguarding the rights of all the stakeholders. So, it involves your employees, it involves your investors, your customers, all those people to whom the business is accountable and responsible. Business law has a very, very important role to play. So over the years, business law has gained a significance because as the environment keeps on changing, it is very dynamic in nature. So it's a requirement that we should have adequate knowledge about the laws which are in our country and how do they govern different kinds of business organizations. So as you can see, there are certain business objectives which are mentioned. Objectives of business law, you can just quickly go through them. That I have already discussed that with you initially, that all these objectives of business law are basically to promote good industrial growth. It helps you to lay down procedures for the establishment of various business activities. Whereas if I talk about all these laws which are covered under various different heads of business laws, they are very comprehensive set of standards which are established universally. So these kind of enforcement, as I said, these business laws gives you certain provisions for judicially enforcing certain rights of all the parties which are involved in a business transaction. So businesses can approach the court to enforce against the claims or any kind of an injust which is done to all the different kinds of bodies at central, state and at local level, so that if any kind of an injust happens, a legal action can be taken against them and they can easily defend themselves. So these are all certain objectives which are which you will be studying in the as part of the objectives of business law. You can read out, you can just go through these objectives. I'll just move on to what is the scope of business law. Just give me 2 minutes of time and I'll join. Just give me 2 minutes of time. It's a very urgent call and I need to take. Okay, so I was just talking about the certain objectives of business law. I'll just share that screen again. And moving ahead to scope of business law, if I say, let us understand what do we mean by this word scope. Scope means that what is the ambit of the different areas in which this law applies. So it is not restricted to a law which is related to a particular company, or are we going to study only to the laws which are related to contracts, property, agency, sale of goods, bailment, intellectual property right. But it is also where we say that there are a huge range of laws which have been enacted for the proper commencement of business activities. So in business law, we study it as a subject which has a very, very wide scope. We have all those areas where we try to understand that if there is any legal corporation or business entity which is done, so what are the different ways in which any kind of an action which goes against the business, how it can be resorted by the business entity, and it gives a kind of a proper a framework where of legal consequences or any kind of a legal things where even it safeguards, as I was just talking about, that it safeguards the rights of all the stakeholders. So business laws are basically to subserve the interests of the society at large. If I put it in that way, it includes everything. It is dealing with insurance, it is dealing with your environmental protection, it is dealing with taxation, which are usually very, very important and beneficial for promotion of rights and interest of the general public. So we have all these kinds of different environments in which you do business activities. So to keep a check on market concentrations, different kinds of companies, which is like monopoly, monopolistic, and oligopoly companies which exist, these certain laws restrict them not to do any kind of illegal practice or a kind of an illegal action against the customers or the suppliers or the investors of that particular area of business. So now when we talk about that government, and I say I give you certain examples in if I put it in this way, that from India, the government has had invited bids for the Air India divestment process, for which Tata Group and SpiceJet promoters have submitted certain bids. I hope all of you understand what is bidding. So the government then decided to offer 100% stake in the debt-ridden state, which is the airline this time. So this has been done after Air India had failed to attract any bidder when the government had offered a 76% stake in the former 3 years ago. This is where we say, that the government tries to facilitate business transaction wherever it is required, which is for the best interest of the company. All these corporate restrictions under business law which are there, it encompasses a broad range of transactions, as I was just talking about, under its ambit, which includes not only its purview but also different kind of changes which are there in capital structure, infusion of high risk of debt, to selling off business lines or making any kind of a new acquisition. So many times when there are mergers, when there are acquisitions, there are takeovers, any kind of a demerger happening, joint ventures, we require the backing of various laws which help the business and the business act, the people, those who are involved in that, to take certain decisions which is in the favor of all. I will be talking about all of them. Like we have Companies Act, we have Partnership Act, we have SEBI Act, we have FEMA, which is the Foreign Exchange Management Act, which is replaced by FERA, that is Foreign Exchange Regulatory Act. So these are all different types of wide ranges of acts which are under the ambit of various laws, and wherever there are any kind of these mergers or amalgamations, or there is a merger through absorption, or there is an acquisition or a takeover, it is very important to have a proper knowledge of all these different laws. So when you are aware about these laws, what becomes easy is you are able to take decision, keeping in mind the interest of all the stakeholders, those who are involved. That is what is the business law gives you a kind of a backup. That is what is business law supports you. That is what is business law is required for. So from everyone's point of view, if we see, it is very important for people who are into business activities to know about it, that what is and where it is going to affect different stakeholders, those who are involved in their business activities. As I was just talking about, there are various sources of business law. First common source which comes is called as your constitution. So every country's constitution, through different kinds of interpretations from the Supreme Court, there are amendments which are done. You consider certain kind of laws which are floated, and where we try to basically look for different kinds of I would say compliances coming from the government side. So the Indian Constitution also has established certain fundamental principles, which are basically the rules which are given for individuals, where individual state is actually governed by it. So this term constitutional law refers to the general limits and powers of central and state government, and they're written in the constitutions. So if I talk about taking example of India, the Indian Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and all the laws of the country have their foundations in the Indian Constitution itself. So if I talk about certain kinds of, like the terminologies for our country, we have a preamble of constitution incorporated with the terms as secular, as socialist, which basically means to strengthen the objectives for the I would say, to promote social welfare. There are certain articles which are basically, which covers, I would say, certain different areas where the state has a responsibility to take care of welfare of the people, so that the social order, or I would say the social justice, prevails. So, as it is more about, of our nation, you can also refer to the constitution of your own country to have an idea about that in your country, what are the different constitutional laws which helps you to perform various kind of business activities. Just give me a second. Okay, I hope that learner has already been admitted. Thank you so much. Okay, Vasant has joined. So, second is where we talk about different statutes. Now, what are these statutes? Statutes are, or rather, it can be defined as different acts of legislature which are in the written form. So, all those legislative actions which have taken place are called as statutes, and which can be referred at a later stage. So, the parliament and the state legislatures have certain kinds of, these statutes where if there is any kind of a common thing which happens as a common source of law, that can be referred in the coming future. So both parliament and the state assemblies have enacted number of legislations that cover various aspects of business, which is actually referred by various states whenever they require, wherever they require to take any decision. Okay, good evening, Vasant. Okay, now talking about certain cases, as I was just saying, so these cases, the past cases, also have a very, very strong impact because they play an important role in changing the entire, shaping of the law and bringing out its relevance as per the prevailing conditions in the society. So when we refer to certain case laws, constitutions, legislatures, and administrative agencies, they basically helps us to prevent certain other actions. So they give us the boundaries of these laws are basically self-explanatory. I'll put it in that way. So laws, when they are interpreted, case laws is basically all those collection of legal interpretations which are made by the judges. So those, as I was just saying, these statements which are passed by various judges. So the alternative name to these case laws, it is also given as law of law as a common law, is the judge-made law. So these interpretations can be referred in the court of law if supposingly you have any kind of a similar case for which there are two parties and they have any kind of a grievance or an aggression or any kind of an agitation what they have. So case laws are basically very significant for business because if we talk about in modern business, there are certain multiple legal jurisdictions which prevail, and all these statutory laws are subject to certain interpretations. So one court may have interpreted law in one way, but the other court may interpret it in a very different way, or maybe they have a different approach towards it. So court issues certain judicial decisions which are usually included interpretations of the different statutes and administrative regulations. So we try to solve that particular case depending upon the precedent, like what has happened in the past, which are basically to guide us, to help us to take any kind of a future decision. So any earlier decision which has happened in the past and which is very similar or has a very same pattern of a precedent that guides later decisions can be called as your case laws. Then you have your customs, It is again one of the important source of law. Basically, it is to detect two basic elements to make up the custom, that is material fact and the psychological element. When I say it is a material fact, it means something where you can easily measure the actual behavior or state founded upon the performance of the state activities and practices, whereas psychological element is the kind of belief that the state have on particular certain situation, and what is the legal obligation, what they feel that could be part or the solution of that particular thing. So there are a number of factors concerning nature of particular practices, such as duration, repetition, consistency, and all of them together help us to understand these two different facts, that is whether it is something related to a kind of a psychological element or a material fact. Indian Contract Act, if I talk about, that is nothing therein where you talk about which contains, that shall affect any usage or custom of trade. Negotiable Instrument Act, if I talk about, it gives you nothing therein which contains shall affect any local usage relating to instrument in an Oriental language. So this is a truth which is actually developed, which is used in developed and developing countries, that a custom, when accepted by the courts and incorporated in all the judicial interpretations, it becomes a law. So there are many examples of it where we see that decisions are accepted by the courts and are incorporated at various judicial interpretations, and then slowly it becomes a law of that particular nation. So let me just ask you till here if you have any questions or concerns. Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
We're just talking about the
Yes,
basic
ma'am. No
overview
question.
about business law. Yeah, we're just talking about the basic overview about business law. I'll not be discussing any such law today. That we will be doing in our later classes. This is just to orient you about the entire concept. Government policies, my dear learners, it plays a very important role, because the legal power to make laws comes from the government, and the government is basically which is a part of your constitution. So laws that are framed according to the policies of government, that is also one of the source of making law in that country. Like for example, if I say, if there is any kind of a focus to promote or to bring ease any in doing business, government then will come up with certain legislations, certain regulations, where they would try to remove those bottlenecks which has increased time consumed in the contracts enforcement. So they will come up with certain kinds of relaxations, certain kinds of promotion of all those areas. Like in India, if I talk about currently, it is, they're promoting too much of tourism sector. Too much of provisions are there for easy financing of MSMEs, women entrepreneurs, bringing policies which are related to e-commerce. So these are all certain examples of government interventions which where they want that sector should grow for regulating the business through policies. So laws are made according to those policies then. That is what is all about your first module, unit 1. Let me quickly share with you your unit 2, that is on certain concepts and principles. Okay, so give me a minute's time. I'll just share the screen and I'll just brief you that what we do in unit 2. As I said, entire first module is all about overview of business law. So we will be talking about certain concepts and principles. When I say concepts and principles, by the end of this unit, you'll understand that there are topics which are certain important concepts which are covered under business law. What are the different statutes that fall under business law in India, and the different methods which are used for resolving if there is any kind of a dispute, including the ADR, which is also called as the alternate dispute resolution. So let us begin. I'll share my screen with you. I hope my screen is visible to everyone.
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Okay. As till now we have understood that law is something which is very important part of any business activity, because that gives you a regulatory framework to perform certain legal actions, to perform certain business activities. But it is also important to understand that it incorporates certain things which are the ambit under the ambit of certain laws, certain kinds of very important guidelines which needs to be followed by every business entrepreneur. So when we talk about enactment of these laws, and the staunch governance is of utmost importance in our country. So as I said, laws are rules and regulation. So it is basically governing the activities of people who are within a country. So both, whether they are natural persons or artificial persons, I hope you understand that when I say natural persons, I'm talking about human beings. And when I talk about artificial persons, I'm talking about legal persons. Like in case of companies, company is said to be an artificial person because company is not a human being, but it has a separate legal entity. It has certain different rights where we say that company has its signature, company has its own legal, I would say, legal identity. That is why we call that company as legal person. So we when we talk about different types of persons which are there in law, we have natural persons and we have legal persons. Now under the concept of business law, when we say there are various types of laws which prevail in India, we have one of the very interesting law which is called as Hindu Undivided Family, which is called as HUF. HUF is prevalent in India, where what is actually that entire law about, where we say that the male members of the family, they become the co-partners in the business by their birth in the family. So if a boy is born in a family, automatically he becomes a partner in that entire HUF firm. And that is because of its karta. The entire business is conducted by the karta of the family, that is head of the family. And every new boy or a child who's born, a male child who's born, he becomes the co-partner of that entire business. So that is where this entire law also prevails. So we have different types of laws related to like purchase of sales and purchases. We have certain concept of SOGS, the sales of good acts. We have laws related to limited liability of partnership, which is called as LLP. We have Partnership Act, which is Act of 1932. We have certain concepts related to what Partnership Act covers: agreement, deed, how a partner can enter, what are the different types of I would say remedies which are there when a partner is getting dismissed or the partnership is getting dissolved. So every single, I think you can now understand that so many different business activities and law is there, which is like working as a very strong framework, kind of a guideline which is given. So companies, when we talk about company, also in India we have the Company Act of 1956. It shares about the rights and liabilities of the shareholders of the company, how company is formed, what is the law of incorporation, what are the different, I would say, ways in which companies, types of companies, public and private companies. This is all again part of certain laws which prevail related to this area of business activity. So in your if I talk about the legal and the regulatory compliances, it is important to adhere to all these legal compliances while you are doing any business, whether it is a sole proprietorship, whether it is a partnership, or whether it is a company, or it is any kind of a corporation. So every business, whichever business you are into, you are there is a certain legal framework which needs to be followed and adopted by those business houses. So 2.3 is about principles. just you can just go through this concept and give me a minute's time. Before that, I would just like to ask you, have you studied this subject before? How many of you are aware about different types of laws which exist in your nation? I would like to hear from you. Anyone? Have you studied this subject before?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so any idea about the business laws which prevail in your country?
Yeah, there are some laws that, like, I mean, the filing of returns and the number of directors, and
Okay,
there are some laws that apply to companies that are listed on the stock market. There's some laws to
okay.
that. Yeah.
So you're talking about majorly about the law of company.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Anyone who's aware about different types of mercantile laws which are there? Like when we talk about partnership, when we talk about sole proprietorship, I hope you all know that there are different forms of doing business. Are you aware about it? Are you aware about it that there are different forms of doing business?
Here, in Mauritius, there's no like particular law especially designed for partnerships or sole traders, but there are some laws that govern businesses. For example, sanitation laws, things like this, and laws about employing people, salary scales, things like this. We have the minimum wage here.
Minimum
Uh,
Wages Act.
yeah, and
Okay.
also the to be able to set up a business somewhere if you want to build your own infrastructure. So you have some standards that you have to meet. So yeah, basically things like this.
Okay. Anybody else who would like to add anything more? Anyone from the meeting right now? Anyone who would like to add anything more? Vasant has shared so many things. Anybody who would like to add about certain laws which you have come across, or which you felt that yes, they are very, very important? Laws related to consumer protection. Do you have law of any such kind in your country?
Yes, we do have, ma'am. We do have laws protecting consumers. Yeah,
So,
especially those
laws
who buy on credit
online.
or and yeah, higher purchases. Yeah, things like this. We do have laws. Yeah.
Very good, Vasant. Anybody else who would like to add on anything?
Like in Malawi, we also have laws which guides the consumers. We actually have a body which oversees the prices on the market and how they are being raised, if they are following the procedures for raising the prices. So we do have such laws.
See, this is a subject where, it is very important for us to understand in the very first academic counseling that when we talk about different types of businesses and we talk about different types of business laws, so it is important to understand what are the different forms of businesses. And then for every business form there is a separate law. Like if I talk about different forms, it can be sole proprietorship is one form of business where you have one single person who is taking care of the entire business activities. He enjoys the profit also, but then he manages the losses also of the business single handedly. Then we have partnership, which is an extension after that, where we say that, you have two or more partners or two or more people who come together. They have common goal, they have something, a common business idea. They share their resources, they have certain capital, they have certain resources with them, and then they divide a kind of, do an agreement where they have certain understandings regarding your different types of, I would say, profit sharing things, loss bearing things, the capital, the I would say the different resources. So whether that before it was individually, when it was sole proprietorship. Now when I say it is partnership, so it is more about where you are talking about two people, three people coming together. So resources are also increasing, right? So in this case, what is happening? Another form of business, doing economic activities. Economic activity is where you are involved into purchase or sale of any kind of an activity which is giving you in return profit. So your purpose or your aim is to generate profit. Whereas a non-economic activity is you are doing welfare. So when you talk about serving the society, when you talk about involvement in purchase and sale of many things, but the end result is that you are getting, you're doing social welfare, that is called as your non-economic activities of business. Now why I have discussed all these with you, because as I say that this entire subject business law is where you will be discussing about various laws. So it is very very, I would say, extensive data which is going to come, or extensive content which is going to come, and it is at times it becomes really very difficult also to remember all these kinds of different laws, which prevail. So my request would be that whenever like this entire academic counseling is going on, please prior to that read the content and come, so that it becomes easy and it will be more of interaction rather than I talking from one end in a very monotonous manner. So as the main purpose of this academic counseling is to clear your doubts, to give you a kind of orientation, to tell you about the subject more. So if you read that particular subject and come for the academic counseling, I'll be able to connect with you. I hope I'm clear.
Yes, ma'am.
I was just talking about, certain important things related to the business laws, and we were talking about what are, why is it is very, very, the very basic concept under business law. What does it has? So we have just discussed about it. I've asked from you in your nation. Few of you said that you have laws related to company, related to partnership, consumer protection acts are there, disputes also, if they are there are any kind of disputes in the businesses. So we have laws where we in India we have that as law of contract, which is called as contract act, and we try to resolve different types of grievances which are part of those different contractual activities. So when you talk about certain principles of business law, there are certain important principles such as law and mortality. I hope all of you understand what is mortality.
That word again, ma.
Yes, Hakim.
Question again.
I was just asking you all that can you tell me what is this word mortality? What do we mean by this? See, when we talk about certain, the natural law schools of different countries, they basically postulate that law is based on what is correct. So, different law philosophers, they have emphasized a moral theory of law. Let me explain you that theory. That is, which says that law should be based on morality and ethics. That means it is natural law which is discovered by humans through use of reason and choosing between good and evil. So we need to understand that law cannot be something which is without any kind of an evidence. Onus to proof or evidence for that particular act is very, very important. And the very efficiency of the legal system also depends upon the moral attitude towards the notion of legality. Like when you talk about there are certain legal matters or there are certain legal things, so it is basically the country which is framing that particular law which has the concern for not having any kind of an injust for the people, those who are part of that society, or the people those who are part of that particular country. So one, that is one area. Then it is, we call that as business ethics. Why do we say business ethics are very important? Ethics are also what is called as your moral role and responsibility. So when I say business ethics, it is very important to understand that ethics is the study and practice of certain decisions about what is good or what is wrong, or what is good or bad, or what is right or wrong. So ethics tell us certain way in which we understand that to do a particular thing, to perform a particular thing in a given situation, what should be the way of performing that particular thing. So business ethics is basically when you apply these ethics to a problem or an opportunity, so you try to explore different kinds of possibilities what can happen. So it is very important to understand that in legal rules, the legal law frame which are there, business ethics serve as a very interactive system. We need to understand that there are all these kinds of informations and different assessings of these informations which are done. So principle of contract law, or like if I talk about, for instance, it helps to facilitate market exchange and trade because the parties to an exchange can count on the enforceability of the agreement. So if there is no enforceability of the agreement, that becomes an avoid agreement. Right. So certain legal rules which govern that exchange has helped us in a very great extent to understand certain sense of commercial ethics. Now, moving on to a few points which are there, which is called as your, I would say, statutes which are covered under business law. I'll just share the content with you so that becomes easy for you to understand. Now, when you talk about certain statutes which are under business law, we have Indian Contract Act. I was just talking about it few minutes back. That is the Act of 1872. These are all those various enactments which are brought forth by the legislature, which actually helps in providing various guidance for performing various kind of business activities. So, if you are following certain procedures, certain regulations, so these acts which are there, they give you a guideline, a base for all these business activities. So we have Indian Contract Act of 1872, which is basically a law which is taken commonly from law of England. If you remember in the beginning, I was talking about it. The entire drafting and formation of this helps you. The entire law helps you to perform certain important roles in understanding business entities to establish business relationships. So Contract Act is basically which helps you to encompass certain provisions regarding law of agency, law of bailment, law of guarantee, and indemnity. We'll be talking about them in the coming classes, so you will understand these concepts. SOGA, or which is also called as Sales of Goods Act, is the Act of 1930. So there are certain. It was earlier part of Indian contract only, but then later this was as a a separate act altogether. Earlier it was under the Chapter 7 of ICA, and today when we study this act, it is altogether the SOGA Act. So there are certain things which are very common also in Indian Contract Act, which are part of SOGA. This is basically regarding providing all kinds of remedies if it is required under, to all the buyers and sellers regarding any transfer of ownership, any kind of hurdles which they have, understanding that there is a separate certain rights which are for the protection of the buyers and sellers, eventually to understand this law is regulating various things. And there is also one concept which is called as the principle of caveat emptor. It's very very interesting, and I think, as I was just talking with you a few minutes back, that in your nation also you might be having Consumer Protection Act. So caveat emptor is basically where we say that let the consumer or let the buyer be aware. So it is not always the fault of the seller, but also this act contains certain provisions as principles of caveat emptor, which says let the buyer be aware while he or she is also purchasing a particular good or availing a service from a corporate or a business or a sole proprietor. We have another act which is called as Negotiable Instrument Act, which is all about the Act of 1881. So we have certain important things in this, that is certain bills of exchange, checks, hundies. Then we have also in this, the act also covers certain laws which are related to promissory notes. This is all about what negotiable instrument is all about. So financial system encompasses of all those credit and cash transactions. So under all these transactions, it is very important to know that what are certain obligations that need to be assumed, or rather that needs to be understood to study the entire act which is related to in the certain monetary terms or monetary areas. So bill of exchange, hundis are all those negotiable instruments, checks which are used nowadays. We do not have hundis, but yes, checks and bill of exchange are there. So who's basically kind of promisor or a promissory in a promissory note. When we talk about in the bills of exchange, we have various parties, and all together who's the endorser of that particular check. So that is all what we study in that act and their legal obligations attached to it. Indian Partnership Act 1932 is again one act which basically talks about that when you have more than one person involved in the business, and we call them as partners. So, what is a partnership deed? Why is it important? What are the certain legal restrictions which the partners have? What is the important role of each partner when a new partner is admitted or a partnership gets dissolved? So at that time, what are the legal obligations? That is what we study in Indian Partnership Act of 1932. Then we have an act of LLP, which is called as Limited Liability Partnership. This is an extension of your Partnership Act, which provides comparatively more flexibility and dual benefits. It is basically a blend of partnership and company both. So LLP is basically an alternative, I would say, corporate body, which helps you, which has certain conventional partnership forms laws also, and but then it also has certain benefits of a Companies Act. So then you have followed by that Companies Act, which is the amended 2013 Act. The Corporation Act of Company is 1956. How does a company get incorporated? What are the different kinds of legal provisions? How a company can be, there are certain kinds of mergers or insurance which happen. So all that becomes part of the Companies Act. This act basically provides us with certain provisions and gives us certain kinds of I would say frameworks in which how does a company performs certain legal actions. So in certain mergers, amalgamations, or even if there is a demerger which is happening, so it's very important to understand certain legal compliances. So, for all these industrial and commercial activities which are performed while you are running a company, it is important to know the legal framework. Then we have employment and labor laws. I think we have already studied a part of it when I was taking human resource management, and I said HR, when it is part of any organization, there are certain labor laws. So we have certain laws which protect the rights of the labor, governing employer-employee relationship. So we have, as few minutes back, somebody was saying Minimum Wages Act. So we also have certain act which is Code of Wages, Industrial Relations Code 2020, Occupational Safety, Health and Working Condition. We have a code which is called again the Code of 2020, which covers all these areas. So we have a Code of Social Security, all of them basically to safeguard the rights of the employees, so that there is no kind of anywhere where they feel that their rights are being hindered. So if there is any industrial dispute, any kind of a matter related to wages or any other employment concern, the labor laws helps to resolve all these kinds of issues. So they are all legal frameworks which are given, which formulates that particular guideline how the companies or different organizations have to perform. Again, you were telling me about tax laws. So we also have certain tax laws, direct taxes, indirect taxes. GST is again one of the, I would say, new change which has come here in India 2 3 years back, and we have started with GST, which prevails or which is levied basically on the sale and provision of various goods and services. So irrespective of whether you are, the burden actually gets divided as it is an indirect tax. So we have calculations of the direct taxes, GSTs as an indirect tax, and all those financial obligations which are, where we require that proper guideline from state and central or from local authority. So we have certain, like if you're gaining anything in income, capital gain, sales of property, so tax laws plays a very important role. Then you have further laws related to finance, security laws. If you are involved in any kind of an international business, security law here in India, we have law which is called as SEBI, that is Security Exchange and Exchange Board of India, which basically is known for capital market laws and regulations. So where the securities are basically, the corporations are there and you undertake or offer various investment to general public. So it's very important and vital that you understand that when you are doing such kind of business activities, there has to be a proper check from the government. So for that, all these reasons that I said, to safeguard the interest of the investors in securities, we have the we have the Law of Security and Exchange Board of India Act. When you are involved in any kind of international business, we have international business laws, we have FEMA. We earlier used to have FERA, which is then replaced by FEMA. So Reserve Bank of India is entrusted with certain responsibility in managing the entire foreign exchange. That is all what is part of your FEMA Act. Consumer Protection Act is also very, very important, because if we talk about the consumers, it is very important to protect their interest and to lay down certain rules which help the consumer for any kind of settlement of consumer disputes. So the CPA, that is Consumer Protection Act, are basically amended from time to time, and there are recent amendments still done because of the e-commerce, which is now there, where you the entire business, or I would say the purchase and sale, is shifted from the traditional buying through the e-commerce method. So that is again where we give them a platform where the consumer feels that he or his or her like concerns are being heard, they are informed, they have certain rights regarding the consumer awareness, and also certain rights for certain redressals if they have any exploitation. We also have a law of arbitration. This is basically when you have any kind of a grievance in the companies, and that is not something which gets resolved. So we have arbitration and conciliation boards. If you remember, you were there with me in the previous academic counseling of HR, and we have discussed that in your grievance redressal procedure also, that we have a third party intervention where we have the arbitrators and the conciliation boards who help you to resolve that kind of disputes which the employees have in the company. So we have again here few of different, I would say, to list a few, we have like SIAC, which is also called as the Singapore International Arbitration Center. We have the Arbitrator Act of 1996 here in India, and similarly, depending upon various countries, all these arbitration acts are there to have the intervention of a third party, so that if the matter is not resolved between the employer and the employee. Nowadays we have this buzzing thing which is called as your intellectual property laws. So IPR or IPL is again something which is associated where you want to safeguard the rights of the people, those who are involved into various things which are of literary matters or the artistic works or the inventions or the symbols which if they come up. So to protect them, we give them patents, we give them copyright, trademarks, industrial designs, certain geographical indications which becomes basically their landmarks, or which is basically their identity. So certain trade secrets are there. For all those protection, we have a IPR or an intellectual property law. That is basically, again I would say, one of those laws which is protecting all the innovative ideas which are growing and developing or helping the country to grow. So IPR and to people those who have that technological know-how, and you want that they should, their rights should be safeguarded. So it is undoubtedly, I would say, one of those laws which help us in the protection of all those people who are involved in the stimulating creativity, and to reward all these innovators, we have this IPR Act. So when you will read about all these contents which are given, you will come to know that almost for every single thing, we have certain laws as regulations which help to protect people at different level, whether it is common public, whether it is employees, whether it is consumer as your stakeholder. These regulations are basically those guidelines where government try to protect not only the consumers or the society at large, but also wherever people are involved in. So to the entire complex disputes which if it happens, so you also have a commercial courts act that is called as the Commercial Act of 2015. Any questions, any doubts till here?
All clear. Thank you.
Okay, so you can write that in the chat box if you have any concerns. Okay, so let us come to the last topic for your academic counseling today, that is the alternative dispute resolution. This is one of the very, very important areas, which is also called as ADR. It is basically nowadays what happens is that is a path of litigation, basically, where the court system tries to resolve the commercial disputes which is usually which takes years to get resolved. So rather than going through those legal ways or those legal I would say regulations which are already existing, we have certain process of litigations where the normal business operations which otherwise are getting hampered or disrupted. So to avoid all these issues, businesses, what usually we prefer for is we try to get those solutions through a separate mode of settlement where you don't want to involve the court. So these kind of disputes are resolved outside the court judicial system, and they are called as your alternative dispute resolution, which is called as ADR. So ADR includes something which is within the scope of the arbitration, negotiation, and mediation. I've already covered this part while I was talking about your human resource management grievance handling. And in the grievance procedure, I've already said about negotiations, mediations, conciliations, arbitrations, and trials. So when you go for all these methods, it is basically intervention of the third party. The process is more, I would say, voluntarily. The parties try to go for this entire negotiations. So in negotiation, basically you don't have a third party does not intervene. So it is basically past event. If you still have certain agreements where you're not able to come to a common consensus, so you try to resolve that thing. You try to make certain compromises, and you look for an agreement which satisfies both the parties, that is your I would say employer and employee. So the parties are the ones that resolve those situations. Those are those people, those who involve in negotiation. We also call that as collective bargaining. I hope with this word you remember that, that is something what we have done in your classes of human resource management. If once you are going to refer to those PDFs which are already shared with you, or which you can refer through your LMS, you will find that under ADR there are certain techniques which are used in various countries. They have their own techniques which are developed on certain scientific lines. Like we have that in USA, UK, France, Canada, also in Africa, Australia, Singapore, Japan, and China. ADR is something which has emerged as a very, very significant movement in these countries, and has not only helped to reduce cost and time, but also it has helped to develop a very kind of congenial atmosphere, which is very less formal, less complicated forums where you can get your disputes resolved. So that is one of the advantage of ADR, that it is more flexible. It avoids seeking resources, a kind of recourse to the court, so going back again and again, and then you don't so much of time is involved, so much of money is involved to quickly, or in a fast track, if we say that the dispute is resolved or your problems or grievances are resolved in a cheaper way. That is why ADRs nowadays are being used and are being very much gaining so much of importance. So that is all what is there for your the two units which are part of your module 1. So I've covered both of those units, and I request you to please go through those two units. And also for tomorrow, if we have another academic counseling, I will be starting with your second block. Second block is more about business forms and legislation. Partially, I have discussed that, but in tomorrow's academic counseling, we will be talking about two forms, that is the Partnership Act of 1932 and the Companies Act of 2013. Okay?
Okay, ma'am.
They are very, very exhaustive, very lengthy, both partnership and company. So we'll try that in our academic counseling for tomorrow. We'll cover that in, like, for first hour I'll be talking about Partnership Act, and in the second hour then I'll take up your Companies Act. Please go through it, read that and come, so that it becomes easy for us to connect. I hope you all are able to access your LMS.
Yes, ma'am.
Is the content shared with you? Do you have the access to your content?
Yes, yes, we have
Yes,
it.
Yes,
ma'am.
we do.
We have contact.
Yes, we do.
Okay. So please go through it, read it, and we'll be meeting tomorrow for our next academic counseling, as it was only for the first module. If I say the first block, that was about 2 units. So we have finished our academic counseling for today, and I will be interacting with you tomorrow in our next academic counseling. Thank you so much. for attending the academic counseling and hope to see you tomorrow.
Thanks a lot, ma'am. Have a good evening. Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you. See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Bye.